My name is Nora Bennett. I'm 63 years old, and if there's one thing I've always held on to, it's the joy of making the people I love feel special. That morning, I carried a small birthday cake with trembling hands, the kind of trembling that comes from excitement more than age. My son Caleb had just turned 35, and though he was busy with his own life now, I wanted to remind him that he was still my boy, the same little one who used to blow out candles while giggling with frosting on his cheeks. I slipped into his car quietly, the cake box balanced carefully on my lap. I could almost see his face when he'd find me there, waiting to surprise him. My heart swelled with memories, sticky summer afternoons chasing him around the yard, late nights patching scraped knees, the quiet talks we shared when he grew older and thought the world was too heavy for him alone. Being his mother had always been my proudest role, and moments like this made me feel close to him again. The sweetness of it all wrapped around me like a warm blanket. But even as I sat there in the stillness, I noticed how silence can change when you're waiting. The ticking of the car clock grew louder. My chest tightened, though I told myself it was only nerves. Then the doors opened, and voices filled the space, voices that weren't meant for me to hear. At first, I thought I had misheard, but as the words sank in, sharp and deliberate, that blanket of warmth unraveled. My hands tightened on the cake box as a knot formed in my stomach. I realized in that instant that this birthday surprise wasn't going to unfold the way I had planned. And that was the beginning of everything, the plan, the unraveling, and the truth I could no longer ignore. Next came the birthday surprise itself. I always loved planning little surprises, and this one felt extra special. Caleb was turning 35, but in my heart, he was still that boy with sticky fingers, blowing out candles with frosting smeared across his cheeks. I had baked the cake myself, vanilla with chocolate frosting, his favorite since childhood. The smell still clung to me, sweet and comforting, like a hug I wanted to wrap around him. I slid into the back seat of his car, balancing the cake box carefully, and tucked myself down low. It was cramped. My knees pressed against the seat, but I couldn't help grinning. I imagined the look on his face when he opened the door and saw me there, his mother popping out with a cake like some mischievous conspirator. At 63, maybe I should have felt silly, but instead, I felt giddy, almost childlike. Memories bubbled up as I waited birthday mornings, when Caleb would race downstairs in his pajamas, his little sister trailing behind, both of them wide-eyed at the sight of balloons and presents. I could still hear his laughter, so free and unguarded. Planning this surprise gave me a taste of that again, as if I could reach back in time and hold it for just a moment longer. Still, as the minutes stretched on, the air inside the car grew heavier. The frosting's sweetness mixed with the faint scent of leather and gasoline. My heart thumped harder, not just from excitement, but from something else I couldn't quite name. Then I heard it, the sound of footsteps, steady and familiar, approaching the car. My breath caught. The surprise was seconds away. I clutched the cake box tighter, my smile ready. But the moment he opened that door would change everything, and that's where the discovery began. I crouched low in the back seat, clutching the cake box to my chest like a treasure. My heart was fluttering with excitement, silly as that might sound for a woman my age. I pictured Caleb's face lighting up when he saw me, the laughter we'd share. For a brief moment, I felt young again, almost giddy, hiding like a child about to play a prank. Then I heard it, the scrape of shoes on the driveway, The solid click of the car doors opening. My whole body stilled. The seats shifted as Caleb slid into the driver's side, and then another weight settled beside him. Ava, his business partner. Their voices filled the small space, low and serious, nothing like the cheerful greetings I had imagined. At first, I thought I had misheard, but the words sharpened, cutting through me like glass. Papers, signatures, the house. My name tossed around like I was a burden to be moved rather than a mother to be cherished. And then the cruelest blow, the mention of a nursing home, spoken so casually, as if packing me away was no more complicated than filing a set of documents. I sat frozen, the sweetness of the cake rising up sickly in my throat. My son, the boy I had raised, the man I had celebrated all these years, was plotting to take everything from me. The same hands I once guided across a birthday table were now preparing to push me out of my own life. The laughter I had expected was replaced with a roar of silence inside my head. My fingers trembled, the cake shifting dangerously in its box. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. All I could do was sit there, hidden in the dark, as the truth of their betrayal began to take shape. And that was only the beginning of what I was about to uncover. I sat in the shadows of the back seat, the cake still balanced on my knees, though my hands had gone numb. I told myself I must have misunderstood, that maybe I was twisting their words in my own mind. But the longer I listened, the colder the truth became. They weren't just talking about money. They weren't just planning for the future. They were planning mine without me in it. Caleb's voice carried a weight I had never heard before, a tone that spoke of transactions and signatures, not love or loyalty. He and Ava talked about the house as though it were already theirs, about selling what I had worked my whole life to protect. And then came the part that made my chest ache: discussions of a nursing home, chosen not with care or compassion, but with efficiency, as if I were a problem to be placed neatly out of the way. The box on my lap felt heavier by the second, the frosting beginning to smudge under my trembling fingers. I saw flashes in my mind: Caleb at 6 years old, his cheeks smeared with chocolate icing, his small hand tugging mine with absolute trust. The teenager who asked me for help with college essays. The man who once swore he'd take care of me when I grew old. Those memories clashed violently with the callous words drifting over the seat. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a slip of the tongue. This was betrayal, deliberate and cruel. Something inside me cracked in that moment. The warmth I had carried all day drained out, replaced by a hollow ache that slowly hardened into anger. In that silence, I realized life as I knew it had just ended, and as the sting of tears blurred my vision, another thought began to form. Maybe the signs had been there all along, and I had simply chosen not to see. When I close my eyes, I can still see Caleb as a little boy, his face lit up by the glow of birthday candles, his cheeks puffed as he made a wish. I remember sewing costumes for his school plays, cheering from the bleachers at his soccer games, and sitting up late at night helping him finish homework he had put off until the last minute. Every sacrifice felt worth it, because he was my son, and I believed my love would shape his world for the better. But as I sit here now, the sweetness of those memories feels almost cruel, because looking back, I can see there were signs, subtle, quiet warnings I refused to acknowledge. Times when his thank yous came with a sigh, as if gratitude were a chore. Moments when he brushed off my worries about bills or dismissed the effort behind small things I did for him. I told myself it was youth, or stress, or just the way men sometimes carry themselves. Then came Ava, with her polished smile and careful words. At first, I welcomed her, thinking she brought balance to his life. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began to feel her influence grow. Decisions that used to be ours as a family became theirs, whispered in corners, shared only after they were already made. I convinced myself it was natural, that he was building his own life. I wanted so badly to believe in their goodness that I silenced the unease growing inside me. Now, with their voices still echoing in my mind, I see it for what it is. These weren't isolated moments. They were pieces of a puzzle I refused to put together. And the guilt of that realization sits heavy in my chest. I cannot change the past, but I can no longer deny the truth. If they are willing to strip me of trust, what else might they have already taken? That question haunted me, and it was the beginning of uncovering the financial deception. I woke up the next morning with a knot in my stomach, the kind that wouldn't let me sit still. Grief had kept me paralyzed before, but now suspicion had turned into a sharp, burning need for answers. I told myself I couldn't just wonder anymore. I had to know. So I grabbed my purse, tucked in the folder of old statements I still kept, and drove straight to the bank. The moment I walked inside, the sterile chill hit me. The place smelled faintly of paper and disinfectant, and the clicking of keyboards echoed off the tiled floor. I sat across from a young woman in a crisp blazer, her polite smile barely hiding her discomfort as she shuffled through my records. Each page she pulled felt like a stone dropping into my chest. First, I saw my checking account. Caleb's name was listed above mine primary. Mine was secondary, almost an afterthought. Then came the savings, drained far lower than I remembered. I clenched my hands in my lap to keep them from shaking as I realized money I had worked and saved for had been quietly slipping away. The real blow came when she showed me the file on my late husband's life insurance. My name, the name of his wife of 35 years, was no longer the beneficiary. It had been changed to Caleb. My breath caught. That policy was meant to protect me, to ensure I was cared for after he was gone. And now, it was gone too, stolen without a word. I left the bank with my ears ringing, the papers folded tight in my hands. The shock had burned away into something sharper. This wasn't just careless behavior or Ava's influence. This was deliberate, calculated theft. For the first time, I felt steady. I had proof, and I would not let myself be erased. That was the moment I knew the visit to the bank was only the beginning of facing the harsh truth. I walked into the bank with my heart pounding so loudly I thought others might hear it. The air was cool, almost sterile, carrying the faint scent of disinfectant and paper. Every step toward the manager's office felt heavier than the last. I had told myself it was just to ease my mind, to put suspicions to rest. But deep down, I already knew I was about to face something ugly. The manager greeted me with that polite, careful smile people use when they expect trouble, but can't say it aloud. She laid out the papers one by one, the shuffle of each page sounding like a gavel striking. I leaned in, my eyes scanning the lines, and my stomach dropped. Caleb's name sat above mine, primary holder. Mine had been reduced. Secondary, like I was no longer trusted with my own life. She turned another page, showing withdrawals I could not remember authorizing. Large sums gone. Money I had earned teaching, saving, sacrificing small joys so my family could have more. Every dollar was a piece of me, and now it was vanishing into someone else's pockets. Then came the final blow, my late husband's life insurance. My hands trembled as I read the beneficiary's name. Not me, not the woman who had stood by his side for 35 years. Caleb, my son. The ink on the page looked like betrayal carved into stone. And worst of all, my signature was there too, neat and obedient, on documents I barely recalled, traps disguised as trust. I sat there in silence, letting the weight of it crash over me. Shock, heartbreak, and then something steadier. A simmering determination that rose from the ashes of disbelief. Caleb thought he had outmaneuvered me, but he had underestimated the strength that grief and betrayal can awaken. As I left the bank, the papers pressed tight against my chest. I knew where I had to go next. Home. And this time, I would be the one demanding answers. After leaving the bank, I sat in my car for what felt like hours, the papers still trembling in my hands. The silence pressed in, heavier than anything I had carried before. For the first time in my life, I admitted to myself that I couldn't face this alone. That thought cut into my pride, because I had always been the one others leaned on. But betrayal this deep, it stripped me bare. I stared at my phone, scrolling through names that carried decades of memories. Old friends who had stood by me through weddings, funerals, and the messy middle years of raising kids. My finger hovered, hesitating. What if they thought I was exaggerating? What if shame drowned me before the words even left my mouth? Still, I pressed call. The moment I heard that familiar voice on the other end, steady and warm, something inside me cracked. I spilled the story in pieces, stumbling through it, my voice shaking. And instead of doubt, there was only quiet understanding. Then came more calls, more voices, friends who didn't hesitate, who reminded me of who I was long before this storm. One invited me over, pressing a warm plate of food into my hands as if nourishment could patch the holes in my heart. Another simply squeezed my shoulder and told me I wasn't crazy. I wasn't alone. Each gesture was small, but together they formed a shield. For the first time since overhearing Caleb and Ava, I felt a flicker of hope. My world had been turned upside down, but these people anchored me, reminding me of my worth. By the time I drove home that night, my fear had quieted into something firmer. I wasn't walking into that house broken. I was walking in with allies at my back, and soon, Caleb would know that too. I opened the front door slowly, the familiar creak echoing louder than usual in my ears. My hands were steady, though inside I carried a storm that had been building for days. The house smelled faintly of coffee and floor polish, but it no longer felt like a home. It felt like a battlefield waiting for me to step into the center. Caleb and Ava were sitting in the living room, as if nothing in the world was wrong. Ava wore that polished smile she always carried like armor, while Caleb leaned back casually, scrolling his phone. For a moment, I wanted to crumble right there, to beg for the son I had raised to return to me. But instead, I stood taller, my voice sharp and unshaking as I broke the silence. At first, they brushed me off. Their tones carried the same dismissal I had felt before, like I was fragile, confused, making too much of things I couldn't possibly understand. But I did understand. I told them about the bank visit, about the signatures that weren't mine, about the insurance that had been rerouted without my consent. Each word I spoke seemed to chip away at their confidence. The air grew thick as my anger rose. I thought of every sacrifice I had made for Caleb, every birthday cake, every late night, every piece of myself I had given, and now I was standing in front of a man who had plotted to strip me of everything. My grief cracked into fury, and I let it out, raw and undeniable. For the first time, Caleb's phone slipped from his hand. Ava's smile tightened, her mask beginning to crack. They knew I had uncovered the truth, and there would be no pretending anymore. And in that silence, charged and dangerous, I realized this confrontation was only the beginning. At first, Ava tried to laugh it off. She tilted her head, that same polished smile pasted on her face, as if my words were nothing more than the ramblings of a confused old woman. Her voice carried that sugar-sweet tone she always used, meant to soothe and dismiss in the same breath. But I had seen the paperwork. I had heard the conversations. And this time, I didn't back down. The longer I stood my ground, the tighter her smile became. I saw her eyes harden, the warmth draining from them until they looked like glass. Her hands, once neatly folded in her lap, began to clench. She tried again, softer this time, as though lowering her voice could make me doubt myself. But my silence held, and with it, the truth pressed harder against her mask. Then, the crack came. Her words sharpened, slipping past the veneer she had so carefully built. What started as a measured defense turned into venom disdain laced with entitlement, each sentence dripping with the arrogance she had tried so hard to hide. The sweetness was gone. In its place stood the cruelty I had always felt lurking beneath. Hearing it stung, but in a strange way, I felt relief. For months, maybe years, I had questioned myself, wondering if I was imagining her coldness, her control over Caleb. Now, in my own living room, she revealed herself without disguise. The mask had slipped, and the woman in front of me was no longer pretending to be family. I realized then that this was no misunderstanding, no family quarrel that could be soothed away. It was a battle of intentions, and hers were poisonous. I sat in that moment, holding her glare with my own, and I knew what I had to do. From that night forward, I would build my case quietly, piece by piece. The war had begun, and I would not fight it alone. I knew then that storming and shouting would only play into their hands. If I wanted to survive this, I needed more than anger. I needed proof. So I began moving quietly, like a shadow in my own home. At first, my hands trembled as I opened drawers and sifted through files. But over time, the fear steadied into focus. I found bank statements tucked away in folders, insurance policies folded in envelopes, and contracts with signatures that looked too neat, too practiced. I slipped them into my purse one by one, later making copies at the library where no one would think to look. The hum of the machine, the warmth of the paper, it felt like small victories, each sheet a weapon in my growing arsenal. Every night, when the house was still, I wrote notes in a small notebook I kept hidden under the mattress, dates, details, things overheard in passing, even Caleb's casual remarks, which once stung as thoughtless, now read like threads in a larger web of deceit. I logged them all. There was always the tension of footsteps outside the door, of voices drifting down the hall. I learned to close folders quickly, to steady my breathing when a shadow crossed the doorway. Living like that was exhausting, but each act of secrecy gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in months. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was gathering my strength, piece by piece. And as I stacked the papers in a locked box under my bed, I knew I was ready for the next step. Confronting them again would change nothing. This time, I needed their own words, their confession, captured and undeniable. That was when I set my mind on Marcus. If anyone could slip, it would be him, and I would be ready. I knew the evidence I'd gathered so far would only go so far. Papers could be twisted, signatures could be argued over, but voices, their voices, would be undeniable. That was why I decided to take the risk. My hands shook as I checked the recorder on my phone, making sure the battery was full. The screen dimmed and the sound muted. One wrong move and they'd know. I slipped it under a cushion in the living room where I knew Marcus often sat when he visited. My chest thudded so hard I could feel it in my throat. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump. I told myself to breathe, to act normal, though nothing about this felt normal. When Marcus arrived, his voice carried in that easy, careless way of someone who believed he was safe. He spoke to Ava, not realizing I was just out of sight. I held my breath as his words spilled out, talk of money shifted, assets secured. My name spoken like I was an obstacle instead of a mother. Each sentence felt like a knife, yet at the same time, it was exactly what I needed. The recorder sat there, invisible, catching every syllable. My palms were slick with sweat, and I kept glancing toward the couch, terrified he'd notice. But he never did. He leaned back, talking freely, his arrogance shielding him from suspicion. Hearing it out loud, the schemes, the nursing home plans, the way they spoke of me as if I were already gone was almost too much to bear. But beneath the ache, a flicker of fire sparked, proof. At last, I had it. When they left, I retrieved the phone with trembling fingers. My body sagged with relief, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to feel a sliver of triumph. I wasn't just surviving anymore. With this recording, I finally had a weapon. And I knew exactly what I was going to do with it. The tables were about to turn. I thought I could keep my anger contained. For days, I carried it like a burning coal, tucked inside, smoldering but hidden. But sitting across from Marcus and Vanessa, hearing their smug little tones, seeing the way they looked at me as if I were already defeated, it was too much. The coal burst into flames, and suddenly there was no stopping it. My voice rose before I even realized I was speaking, the words tearing out of me sharper than I'd ever heard myself sound. All the hurt, all the betrayal, every sleepless night it poured out in a torrent. I told them I knew everything, that their scheming wasn't clever, it was vile, that they had mistaken my silence for weakness, and that was their greatest mistake. Their faces changed in an instant. Vanessa's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing like a cornered animal. Marcus tried to bluster, to puff himself up, but I could see the crack in his bravado. And in that moment, I made it clear if they pushed me any further, I would burn everything down around them. I wasn't asking. I was promising. The silence that followed was heavier than any words. My threats hung in the air like storm clouds, and I could see them wondering just how much I really had on them. The truth was, more than they could imagine. For the first time, I felt the power shift. They weren't in control anymore. I was. And I knew then, with icy certainty, that I would not just survive this, I would strike back. They wanted me erased. Instead, I would be the one writing the ending. This was no longer about fear. It was about war, and I was ready. The time had come to turn the tables with evidence. The flashing lights outside my house cut through the night like sharp blades, and for a moment I felt small under their glare. The officers moved with a precision that made my heart pound harder. Every clipped word and stern expression reminding me this was no longer just a family matter. It was now the law's domain. Watching them step inside, hearing the rustle of paperwork and the heavy sound of handcuffs being readied, I felt both vindicated and terrified. My evidence, the recordings, the documents I had painstakingly gathered, became more than scraps of paper and whispered confessions. In the hands of the investigators, they carried weight. I watched as Marcus's face shifted from arrogance to unease, and Vanessa's practiced sweetness collapsed into a brittle mask of fear. It should have been satisfying, yet my chest ached. These were the people I had once trusted, and now they stood cornered by the truth. The courtroom came next, a cold arena of wood and steel where every word mattered. Sitting there, my palms damp against the worn bench, I felt exposed under the gaze of strangers deciding the outcome of my life. The prosecutors laid out the betrayal with methodical precision, their voices steady where mine had once trembled. My heart lurched with every revelation, but alongside the fear was a current of strength. The lies were no longer mine to carry alone. And yet, as the gavel struck and the day's proceedings closed, I couldn't shake the sense that something still lingered in the shadows. Justice was moving, yes, but slowly, imperfectly, and I knew Marcus and Vanessa weren't finished fighting. I left that room with my resolve hardened. The law had stepped in, but the story wasn't over. A final twist was waiting, and I needed to be ready. When the final verdict was read, I felt my knees weaken as though the weight of years had been pressing down on me and suddenly lifted. Marcus and Vanessa were found guilty of fraud and coercion. Their carefully built schemes stripped bare in front of strangers who now held them accountable. Watching them led away was not joyous, it was sobering. These were the people I once trusted, the people I once loved in my own flawed way, and now they were reduced to defendants in chains. Justice, I realized, is never clean. It doesn't erase the scars or rewind the clock. It doesn't give me back the years I spent believing in lies. But it does draw a line. It says, enough. It says, you matter. And for the first time in a long while, I believed that again. In the weeks that followed, I began piecing my life back together. The bank restored what it could, and though money had been stolen, I found something more precious in its place, a new respect for myself. I no longer saw myself as a frail widow to be pitied or manipulated. I had fought, and I had endured. Sometimes I still think of the little warning signs I ignored, the moments I brushed off out of love or denial. But instead of drowning in regret, I hold them as lessons. Betrayal may wound deeply, but it cannot define me. What defines me is resilience, the quiet strength to rise even when the world tries to bury me. If my story speaks to you, if you've ever doubted your worth or questioned who truly stands beside you, I hope you take this lesson with you. Trust your instincts, stand firm in your truth, and never let anyone erase you. Thank you for listening to my journey. If it touched you, please like, share, and leave a comment. Your voice matters just as mine does. 6 months have passed, and my life feels almost unrecognizable compared to the storm I once lived through. The shadows of betrayal still linger, but they no longer dictate my days. I wake up now to a quiet house that feels like mine again, not a battlefield, not a place of secrets, but a sanctuary. I've started small, steady routines that bring me peace. Morning walks around the neighborhood, tending to the flowers in the backyard, even joining a book club at the local library. At first, it felt strange to laugh again in a group of people, but each smile reminded me I wasn't broken, just healing. The financial damage was painful, but I've learned to stand on my own. Managing my accounts, making choices with confidence, it's something I never thought I'd have to relearn at my age, but I did. Every step toward independence feels like reclaiming a piece of myself that was nearly lost. What surprises me most is the support I've found. Old friends, neighbors, even people I barely knew before have stepped closer, offering kindness without asking for anything in return. That simple trust has reminded me that not everyone is out to take, and that love can still exist in its purest form. Looking back, I see not just what was taken from me, but what I've gained. A clearer sense of who I am, a strength I never knew I had, and a hope that, no matter how deep the wound, there is always space for new beginnings. And as I stand here now, stronger than before, I can't help but reflect on what this journey has taught me, not just about betrayal, but about life itself. That's what I want to share with you next. When I look back now, it feels almost unreal how far I've come. There was a time I thought betrayal would define me forever, that the hurt would be the last word in my story. But I've learned that even in the darkest moments, resilience has a way of pulling us through. What this journey taught me most is that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's found in quiet persistence, the small choice to keep moving, to keep believing in yourself when trust has been shattered. I discovered that I am far stronger than I ever gave myself credit for. I also learned the value of listening to that inner voice we so often dismiss. The signs were there, but I ignored them out of love and hope. Now I know self-trust isn't selfish, it's survival. And when that trust is paired with the right support system, healing becomes possible. Friends, community, even strangers who stepped forward reminded me that no one has to carry the weight of betrayal alone. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: we are never too old, too broken, or too lost to start again. Betrayal may leave scars, but it can also leave wisdom. And with that wisdom, we can choose to rebuild not as who we were, but as who we are meant to be. If my story touched you, I'd love for you to like, share, and leave a comment. Maybe together, we can remind someone else that it's never too late to find strength again.